Everyone, can we have a big hi to Mike in the chat? I want to start with the most hardball question you've ever been asked in an interview ever.
Oh man, okay, I'm ready.
Why Rocket League?
Why Rocket League? Rocket League found me a few years ago, and at first I thought it was going to be really stupid because it's like I'm at my friend's house. He has this crazy gamer setup where he has a projector that goes down from the ceiling. And I'm like, you want to play soccer with a car? Okay. I mean, don't you want to do something like the sky's the limit here, right? And then I just got addicted to it. It's just so, oh my God. And I have a friend who lives in Philadelphia. He's like my best friend. And so we Skype all the time and play Rocket League together.
That's great.
Yeah.
I love Rocket League. I've dabbled. I haven't gone deep. But I was when I saw that you did a kind of a virtual gig on, was it Wednesday? And then you're like, then I'm playing Rocket League afterwards on Twitch.
Yeah.
I was like, this Friday's going to be good. This Mike guy is okay. Actually, first question from the chat. What is your Rocket League rank? Strange Beats wants to know.
Oh, I'm not ranked because I only play casual. Because every time I try to do competitive, I don't have any fun.
Right, you get obliterated in the first 10 seconds kind of thing.
Obliterated. Yeah. Well, because Rocket League has this there's a bar above which you just can't compete unless you really do just play it all the time, which I'm not trying to do. But it's because people are just flying through the air. You think, okay, I'm a car, I'm driving, I'm doing well, I'm passing to my friend, I'm scoring, but people fly through the air, it's crazy. And you just feel bad for them because you're like, you guys gotta go outside.
You gotta go out, yeah, totally. Speaking of going out,
yeah, says the guy in a windowless room.
Right. I was reading through a bit of the other intel about you that's out online, and you're talking about how actually going for walks and thinking about music outside of the studio kind of became an important part of your process.
Oh yeah.
What was the pressure point that led to that, and then what did you discover on the other side?
Yeah, I think I'm the kind of guy that just drives hard at something until I get it. And that's not, I'm sure as you know, always the best way to reach your creative goal. It's not like everything else in life where sometimes you can grip it so hard that nothing can pass through. So then I started the way I used to write songs is, this is my apartment, which I shared with two people in San Francisco. So not a lot of privacy. And I would just put my headphones on, make a loop that I thought was cool, and then loop that, just the same 4 bars for hours and hours. And just try to get in the zone and sing in my room and just get lost in it and access the subconscious. And that's great for generating melodies or maybe hook lyrics or some cool lyrics. But then I would find that I'm just okay, well, what is this song about? Because yes, subconscious, great, right? But unless you're Bob Dylan or Jack Kerouac, you're not going to be able to do a finished product purely on the subconscious. So then I would just go for walks around my neighborhood. I don't really know why I started it, but I was also new to San Francisco, so I was excited to be exploring. But yeah, I just found that through that repetitive motion, I got kind of zen, and my mind quieted down, and I wasn't really worrying. And then I would just run the lyrics over, and I couldn't write them. That was also the other crutch was I've always been a big fast writer where I'm just blah 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 blah. Okay, and it's but is any of that worthwhile? Is it good? Anything that you just wrote? So then I wouldn't stop and write down the lyric until I was that is the lyric. So it's I'd go line by line. I'd be no, and then I'd walk and be no. And then when I got it, I knew, and it's a great feeling. It's this funny experience I'm having inside my brain.
So were you able to are you saying you were you literally writing the whole song worth lyrics, or were you just trying to find the kind of core meaning, the thing that would unlock it?
Well, so to unlock it, I would do a lot of like typing.
Okay.
I would, there's my journal and my computer is just filled with the first line is, what is this song about? And then I'd be like, okay, well, it's about the. And through that, I would find what I wanted to write about. But then specific lines to like nail those lines. If I held myself to that standard of, I'm not gonna release anything that I know in my heart is below what I want it to be, and I don't always hold myself to that standard. It's tiring, but yeah, that's where the walks would come in handy, is when it was like basically like the song would be done except for 2 lines, which I was just like, they're not perfect, and then the walk would sort of like, everything would loosen up and the glacier would calve and there it would be.
That's wild. Would you do just almost like the massive brain dump, like you just write, and you kind of explore what the song is about? Like, would that be in like a lyrical form, or just like, here's what I'm thinking about, here's what I'm feeling?
Yeah, that would be straight, just for me.
Okay.
And a lot of times I would have to do it halfway through.
Okay.
Because I'd be writing and I'm like, ooh, nice line, okay, that leads to this and that leads to this. All right, cool. But then you look at it and you're sort of like, am I writing this on purpose, or am I just sort of like, am I being lazy, and just saying like, these are pretty lines, but they don't mean anything? Like, I never want to do that. Mm-hmm. And then I always want there to be a reason for the song. It's like, I don't want to make a song just because, I want to. I want to make a song that says something important, whether it's about, my personal life or something I think about existence. I just want there to be a reason for somebody to listen to it, other than the fact that there's like la 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 over dee dee dee,
Totally. And so do you feel like do your lyrics need to like explicitly state something, or do you have like some songs where it's like a poetic explanation that doesn't have to be literal?
Yes. That's almost my preference, is the latter, to have the poetic one that doesn't need to be literal. Because I was extremely influenced by Radiohead in the beginning. I mean, who isn't? But like, and specifically Where I End and You Begin, that song, where, he's just like, I'm opening the clouds, and I can't come down. And you're just like, I don't know what he's talking about, but it's gorgeous, So I love the idea of painting with words too. And I've been doing that less and less, I think, because then I became influenced by Dark Side of the Moon, where, I know, right? Came real late to Pink Floyd, really late. Like this guy who was producing my record Ghost Modern, Eli Cruz, amazing musician. He used to be in Beulah, and he just produced the Tune Yards record. He's such a cool person. And he was like, dude, you must love Pink Floyd, right? Because if you listen to my music, clearly I love Pink Floyd, but I didn't. I had like never ever listened to them, and I don't know why I was turned off by them. I think maybe it was David Gilmour's voice or something at first, where I was just like, I don't understand this. And now, obviously they're one of the greatest that ever lived. But the thing that I latched onto about them and watching all these documentaries was that, there was this one segment where Roger Waters was saying, I was kind of tired of doing all these artsy songs that didn't make any sense, and where you couldn't, and I wanted to write something that was just pure and you could latch onto instantly. And listening to the lyrics on Dark Side of the Moon, they're remarkable because they're all so grounded and simple, but beautiful. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's quite something to aspire to. But I do sometimes, I feel a little insecure about this, because I wonder, when do my aspirations take me on a path that I don't belong on? It's like, you could aspire to do lots of things, like be Bruce Springsteen, for instance, asking for a friend. but maybe that's not you. So it's really hard for me to, you know, get all these disparate influences and then focus them. And it's like, all right, but what do I want to do? So I don't know. You know, we'll see. I haven't taken stock of the new album's lyrics, but who knows? Maybe I've hit a good vein between the two.
Interesting. So do you find actually, even when you're reflecting on your own music, there's a whole, like, you know, deep in the trenches, like, process of creating it, and then do you find that looking back, do you need to do the thing where you don't listen to them for like a year or two or something like that, then you come back and kind of rediscover what was going on?
Well, it's like I don't have that luxury because I have to make the live sessions, you know, in Ableton and
then you have to
take
go
them
play
on
them.
tour.
So you can guess which of us like finishes a record and never sees it again. That would be at this end, yeah.
Yeah, that must be fun. But I I definitely go through a roller coaster of affection with them,
right,
where I'm just like, that's an amazing song. I can't believe I wrote that. And then that same tune, I'll just be like, you're an idiot and a loser, and you really got to get your stuff together.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and I'm just, it's. But this record's been really interesting because it's been done for 2.5 years, maybe,
Whoa.
which is really rare. I mean, because we lost that year.
Mm-hmm.
It was gonna come out March of 2020,
Wow.
And it had already been done for a lot of the songs had been written at least for a year. But this one, for some reason, you know, I feel very present with it still, which is just a joy, because now it's like album rollout season, where usually I have to pretend that these are my greatest friends, you know, where I'm just like, oh man, I this song is like where I'm at creatively, and I have another album's worth of music on my hard drive, and I'm really excited about it, but for some reason it hasn't kicked these children out of my life yet, you know?
That's wild. I love it. That's really interesting. Yeah. We're going to go for a quick tangent nerd question, then I want to pick up this thread again. Every Rose is just asking, what's that acoustic bass looking thing in Mike's studio? It looks crazy.
Oh, yeah, it's actually a cello, and it's an electric cello.
Electric 5-string.
Yeah, but I don't have the fifth one on because it's just, it's so tinny. It's actually, I think it's just a guitar string is that last one. But yeah, I didn't put that on also because the cello only has 4, but yeah, I don't play the cello, but I'm learning this, but I often have a cello in my band, so I just bought this, and then because cellists they kind of hate this instrument at first, and then they love it so much because it's really different. The body isn't there, so then hitting the top notes is really confusing, and the intonation and stuff, but then once they get used to it, they're like, oh, I can shred. Like I plug this into a guitar pedal board and just like make lead guitar sounds with it that sound really organic, and it's very exciting. But I'm trying to learn it myself, and I put it on a few recordings, but it's like one note at a time. I just be like, right, and then find the next one. I'm like, there it is, and then record them and chop it together.
Awesome, love it. Mike, I'm really curious just what you were saying about that roller coaster of emotions with songs. Yeah. And I guess like, I mean, we were talking a little bit more like once songs are done, but I'm curious how you even manage that like during the creative process. Like I'm sure in a way like walking is a way to like get out and reflect on music differently. But, you know, from that initial rush of like, oh, this is a cool idea, or like, oh, this idea sucks, to like all the steps you have to go through to like it's ready to release.
to get from this is a cool idea to this idea sucks to I'm at peace with this idea. Right. Yeah, because I think I'm never where I want to be creatively, right? And that's probably my greatest asset is that I'm always pushing myself. But that does mean a lot of sad reflection times where you're just like, am I a fraud? Am I just doing this for myself? You know, does the world need this when the world does have Radiohead? I mean, I have a friend who won't put anything out, period, because he literally holds his music to that standard. He's like, the other day he's like, Mike, I listen to Bach. He's like, and He's like, so no, I'm not gonna put out my album. And I'm like, okay. But that's not me. When I make something that I think is cool, I get so excited and I want to share it with the world immediately. That's the challenge with me is holding on to it. But I think when I'm making the songs, I'm very into them. And I think I'm a genius, and I'm like, and I'm just so into them. And I think they're the greatest song I've ever made. Like each one, I'm like, this is it. This is the song that's going to blow everything open for me. And then I record them and I'm in love with them. And then somebody comes in and does some extra production and I love it. And then I'm done. And then it's like, then that moment of darkness comes in. Like once it's complete and it's mastered, before it comes out, then I'm like, oh man, is that song even any good? Like, then I really start to scrutinize it, when it's too late, which is maybe an asset too. Cause I definitely don't over toil, I tweak things and I move things around, but I don't destroy things by over toil. Cause I have done that in the past. And it's like that actually, I the other day I was like, I don't have any regrets. And I was like, no, yes, I do. And one of them is this song Vesijärvi that I know a lot of people really like. And I really like too. But my band at the time just like kept pushing me to make something different and something weird. And I was pushing myself to do that too. I was really listening to, who are the guys that made 2 Weeks? Very popular indie band.
Couldn't tell you.
From Brooklyn.
Right.
The Night. Someone in the chat.
Right. Indie band from Brooklyn, I think like Vampire Weekend or who else was from Brooklyn? The Thingamies. The guys with the harmonies.
I mean, yeah. Ed Drost.
Okay.
And anyway, it doesn't matter. Someone will say, all I can think of is Deer Hunter, and it's not them.
Mm-hmm.
A Grizzly Bear.
That's the one with the harmonies, yeah.
Yes, exactly. The guys.
I was going to be the one with a house, but I knew that wasn't their name. Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, I was listening to a lot of that, and I was feeling insecure about how non-weird my output is, because I guess I think about it a lot, and I've always made music that's way prettier than I wanted to. Like insofar as it has rounded edges, like my voice is very round and my choices are very round too. They're very soft choices in a way. Even when I'm using distortion, it's like, it's very diatonic but the music I listen to can be like really beautifully dissonant. So I was really pushing myself there, but I feel like in the process, I got too ego driven and just mangled the song. And I listened to the demo of it a lot. I returned to it a lot, and I'm just like, that's like my my late night with a few drinks experience.
Do you feel were you like trying to prove something?
Absolutely. Yeah. I was basically getting it from all angles. Like my friends were saying like, dude, you got to make your music more hard and more weird. And I was saying that to myself, and my band was saying that to me. And I mean, it's hard staying on the right track. You know what I mean? It's like, and you really don't have much room to screw up. And I mean, that's like a B-side on a popular album, so it's no big deal. But if you take that too far to a full album, it's like, where do you decide to stop your aspirations of what you want to be? And this goes for just being a human too, and decide to just accept what you are and what your place is, and just do that the best that you can. I feel like that's probably the good place for an artist to be, right? Is just like, what am I, and how do I expand that to its very limits, versus like, who do I want to be? What do I want to be? Because then you're kind of like, then you run the risk of being inauthentic, I guess, which people hate. They really hate to hear that.
So it's a really interesting thing, because I really believe in like pushing yourself and trying stuff, but I think the key thing you're saying is like in a true to yourself and authentic way. So it's almost, are you kind of saying like if you try to manufacture some kind of alternate person that isn't true to who you are, that's where it messes up. But if you remain...
Well, it's like I would love to be David Bowie, right? But I don't have that in me. I could maybe fake it. I could maybe just decide, like, gun to my head, you're going to be like David Bowie, but is that what I'm meant to do? Because yes, I totally agree with you that pushing yourself and striving for that extra that's probably also what can make you great. But I guess I think I've experienced both sides of it, where my striving has led me to a place where I was satisfied personally, where I was like, wow, I can do that. It's like I can write a full string section. I had no idea, and now I am at peace with myself. But it's like, did that song need a full string section is the question, So then I'm like, yeah.
If you're like trying to shoehorn stuff into a track that doesn't need it, that's a whole different...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting. Can I come back to something you were saying, which really captured my imagination, which you're saying basically like when you're writing and producing a track, like it sounded like a very consistently positive, loving experience.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I speak to so many people where they're like, just even like writing ideas or, after that initial spark, it's like, oh my God, then kind of fall into the pits of despair about how to turn it into something. Do you feel like there's quite a strong like instinct that's going on, or a strong like path laid before you that just, because I think when you're almost like lovingly responding to your music, it just tells you what it wants.
I agree because you're in a relationship with it. You're in Congress with it, basically. Like you're listening to it, and then it is doing what you tell it to do. It will do what you tell it to do, but if you tell it to do the wrong thing, it's going to do that too. So then just like, it's the one thing about writing that I really don't understand, is like the choices, like the production choices. And when you hit a wall, you're just like, okay, and you look around the room, and you're like, maybe that tool, maybe that tool will spark something. And then you take some time away. That helps a lot, even just like not listening to the song if you have that option. But I think for me, it's really about joy. Like I love making music. It just makes my heart swell just to be working on music, especially in the studio with another person. Like it is just so fun, and you're both just using every cell in your body is focused on making this idea great, and that's very inspiring to me. And the neat thing about music, because I wanted to be a novel writer, and that's what I studied in college, but the act of typing is not fun. It's like you do it to be a writer. You do it to be like, I have written a book, and then, but with music, every step of the way, you are entertaining yourself, like you're just like, ooh, piano, the guitar's even vibrating in your chest, it's just like, so there's a lot to inspire you. And I think when I'm at my best is when I am really just making a song to make myself feel something, rather than, all right, I'm going to try to make people feel something, which does work great a lot of the time. But when I look back at my catalog, the songs that have touched people the most are the songs that when I wrote them, there was like this burst of passion inside me that the sounds sort of elicited, and sometimes I'll just burst into tears, not like crying, but you just be like, oh, you get that well of just like, this is too much for my body and my brain to handle. And that's like, whoa, I did it. I hit the magic spot where it's just like, I have transcended just the human realm. And that's just so amazing, Yeah.
I love it. So the bit of a philosophical question, like where do ideas come from? Like we're getting into like what is consciousness and all this kind of thing.
Very into that, by the way.
Yeah. And I think even like what we were saying before about when you kind of respond to what the track needs, it's like you're listening almost to this outside person. And I think for myself, like I feel like I massively leveled up in music when it was like being able to listen to the inner voice, which wasn't necessarily me. Or I always think about it, or like you're having a dialogue with the speakers, and you know that something's done because they're not asking you for anything else.
Right. Yeah, that's the feeling in your gut, right? Where it loosens. And you're like, oh.
Your gut loosens, not your bowels loosen.
Not your bowels. Your gut.
Yeah.
Yeah, where you're just, the tension just dissipates. And you're like, I have finished. I have completed this. Yeah, I truly think that to answer that question, if we could answer that question, we could lead humanity to its apex. Because I think that the answer to that question is, what is going on? You know, what is the soup that we're all swimming in that sometimes passes through us and then can find its way into other people that makes them feel a part of the soup, right? And I'm using soup because I refuse to believe in God. But it's like, I just, my religion is I have no clue. That's my religion. It's like, I don't know. But something is going on here, and it's way beyond our brains, potentially. I mean, maybe nothing's going on, and then we just, boop, you know, and I'm just here to be plant food. I don't know. But whatever that is, that thing that's happening, I do feel like when you make something, and when you make something special, you're reaching up into it, feeling around, and pulling something down. And so you have to be brave, because like if you reach your hand into a dark space and you start feeling textures, like you'll scream and be scared that they're gonna bite you. But if you can feel around up there with courage, you know, and then also confidence, then you can pluck the right thing down.
I love it.
So there's a non-answer for you.
I mean, it's the ultimate koan, isn't it? Like, what is actually going on? It's not supposed to have an answer in many ways.
True.
Yeah.
And neither is truth real, really. You know, it's like truth is a consensus of faith, I think. It's like, this is true because because enough people, a critical mass of people, have decided to believe in it, right? It's like, because truth has changed so much throughout human history. And I think a lot of like Bob Dylan is the person that I think has gotten closest to a sort of human truth. But if you think of his songs, he never concretely states anything. And so I think truth for human beings is being adjacent to something that seems concrete. So like the answer is blowing in the wind, you know, it's like it goes right by you. The answer goes right by you. You can't decipher it. You can't hear it. But when you hear the answer is blowing in the wind, you're like, it is blowing in the wind. Truth. But then that truth is just gone instantly.
Yeah. Amazing. This kind of leads me on to something I wanted to know about, like, start from the start of Geographer as a project to now. I know that you've got like really into like co-writing with people, and that was part of what brought you to LA. Am I right?
Absolutely, 100%.
So I'm just wondering about like that journey from the initial kind of like inception of the project, and you know, I know there's a lot of things that kind of led you to a point where it crystallized into Geographer. But was there a point in your journey where you're just like, I need to shake this up, I need other people, or did someone say like, hey, go in and work with, you know, what was that transition from it kind of being you in your bedroom to like, let me go and kind of connect with other people and create this different context?
Yeah, it started out so insular, where I would just write by myself and just like make all the songs by myself. But I was very limited in my capabilities. So then I went out and I found a band, and by band I mean like band. You know, it's like We Are Geographer. But I would still write everything in my bedroom and produce almost everything myself, and then at the end take it to the band and be like, "What do you think?" And more often than not, they would just sort of like say, not yet." And then I'd have to go back to my bedroom and do it, rather than the creative process that I think we both love, where it's like, if you don't like it, then you hit me with an idea, right? It's like that, then that idea elevates it, right? And that's what I love about this place so much, is that that's the kind of people that I work with here and that I meet here. Is just like, you don't have to make the whole song by yourself, because that pressure was intense. I was young. I didn't know much really about what I was doing. You know, it was like, and that's the excitement too, that sometimes I mourn the loss of, where, you know, you listen to a song that you're in love with and you have no idea how it was made. But you're trying to figure it out without any forums, without anything, you know, because this is like 2008. And and you just try to figure it out by yourself, which is how I've approached life and scholarship in a way. Like, I never liked research. I always liked pretending I was the first person that ever had the thought, like, why are we here? You know, and instead of reading the myriad of texts that probably answer it better than I could, instead I enjoy just trying to come up with it myself. But so that band and we did have this special magic, you know, where the few ideas that they would put in, and also I will say that one of the reasons they weren't putting a lot of ideas in is because I was so demonstrative. I was like taking up all the creative space in the room, you know what I mean? So I didn't know how to do that at that point either. I didn't know how to let go and see what happens. It was just like, this is my creation, and I want it to sound like this, you know? So there was that going on too. But the few ideas they did put in would really crystallize the songs. And like, and their playing and their performance was just really special. And we had that sort of magic spark that bands do, that you just like love to see. And so we rode that for a while, even though there was like lots of friction. It was really tough. Great people, and you know, but when like the rubber hit the road and it was like, okay, we're going on tour now, this is our lives now, you know, like it just got too intense for the both of them. Well, one of them got sick, like really sick, and then recovered, thank goodness. But then when he got back on the road, he was just like, I can't do this anymore, and I want to be home with my wife. And we were just like, of course, you know, okay. So then it was me and the other guy. And then my manager at the time brought in a drummer just from hell. He was just a... Like, I don't really believe in evil people, but he really had it in for us. And he was going through a lot of stuff and sort of taking it out on us. And it almost destroyed. It was the first time I've lost my desire to be a musician, because I was like, my life sucks. You know, like, I'm with this mean guy, and your band is your family, and I'm so sensitive, and the other guy was so sensitive, and we really were a family. Yeah. And then there's this like bruiser comes in who's just like, I'm gonna be high all the time, and if you go a mile over the speed limit, I'm gonna yell at you. And you're just like, cool. And he would leave his drums like set up and leave in his convertible, which he was driving behind the van. So we have to like pack up his stuff. And I'm like, what is happening here? We've hired this drummer. I'm paying this man. Wow. So I didn't know anything. Just didn't know anything. I was so young and nobody informed me, so I was just like, I guess this is what you got to do, punk rock. And that really crippled, it destroyed that first band. And that was the nail in the coffin for my first cellist, where he was just like, tour was really hard for him, sort of like emotionally, like maintaining his center and like being grounded. He's like very into that stuff. And tour, you're not grounded at all. You can't do anything that you usually do. And so he quit after that tour. He was distraught, because it was his life. He was just like, this is my identity, And I was like, how do you think I feel?
Yeah.
So
we've got a nice understatement in the chat, just saying it can be hard.
It can be hard. Yeah. It can be hard. Yeah. So but I have this resilience inside me where I just refuse to give up, but it was really put to the test there, where I was like, okay, so here I am. I have a big choice to make. Do I start over with a new name, like as Mike Deni, or do I just keep doing what I've been doing and hire a new band? Because really, I really was. I was writing all the, I was just like a name band, like a Bruce Springsteen or a Bjork, but, obviously, Bjork is not a single musician. It's like if Bjork were to walk into a studio and make an album, it'd sound very different than if Bjork, gathers all the just incredible creative minds around her that she does, right? So it's like, in that sense, to me, I knew that the genetics of Geographer would remain the same with new backing people. But for the fans, I think it was like a huge blow to them, where they like really saw us as a creative unit, And so this is a really hard time.
What year was that whole pivot happened? Because was your first stuff out like 2007, 2008? Were you saying your first releases?
Well, 2009 was my first record, which also was a different band, and very different style of music. But then I kind of like became Geographer with Animal Shapes, that EP, and I think that was 2010. Okay. So then I released Myth 2012, and this all happened 2014 during the recording of Ghosts Modern, my next album. So I recorded it with that band, but then once it was done and we went on tour and all the bad stuff happened, then when it came time to release it, it was like, surprise!
Right.
And I had the biggest show of my life, playing to like 2,300 people with a brand new band. And I think people were like genuinely confused and upset. So it was like, God, I felt like my life was falling apart. But so then I had to really... I know this is essentially just the story of my, but then I had to really reassess, like, what is Geographer? Who am I? And how am I going to go forward making music? Because it's very rare that I write a song and and produce the song for myself. And I think, okay, I'm done. That's it. Final song. It happens every once in a while, but almost always I want to bring in that other voice at the end, because it's like, this is as far as I could take it, and I can recognize that, and I could beat this thing into a pulp, but I don't want to. There's no real point. Why don't I just get some genius to come in and just be like, oh, well, you should just put a shaker on the chorus. It's like, Yeah. I mean, usually the ideas are more intricate than that. But so I started working with this guy in San Francisco that, I thought that was going to be, a very, very collaborative relationship, but it kind of ended up being like the other ones where I was coming up with all the ideas and he was just telling me whether they were good or not, Like I've always longed for that producer who's like, cool, good song. How about this arrangement? Like that's what I've always longed for, rather than like me sort of dogging it out, scrapping it out until I can get there myself. So then when I moved here, I just found that's like all that exists here, and it was really jarring for me at first, the writing with other people, because like I had always written by myself, so precious, but then I started like, okay, well, I also need to make some money, so I'm gonna write like songs for TV, like to be placed in a TV show. And that was insane to me, because I'm talking to my friends that I met on tour, and they're like, oh, I quit the band, I moved to LA, and I just like write songs full time. And I'm like, what? you do what? And like one of my friends writes like 250 songs a year or something. Wow. All with different people. Wow. You're just like, what? But so I just started dabbling in that, and I found that I loved it, and it reinvigorated that creativity in me, where it was like, wait, songs are not precious little objects. You don't have to coddle them. Like you can write a song that you want to get in a Target commercial that's about colors, and you can try to make that as good as it should be, right? And it's just as fulfilling in different ways as it is trying to get your soul out of you into a transferable object. So then, over the course of 2 years, I started like really doing that a lot, really writing a lot with people. And some of the songs that came out of it, I actually was like, wait, we wrote a soul song here. So I want to put this on my album, or I want to put this out as a single. And I never could have written this song by myself. And yeah, it's great when they can do both, right? It's great when the song can go into a TV show, but is also an unbelievable work of music in and of itself. So then eventually I was just like, San Francisco is kind of dying, It's like culturally that it was really changing from where I was, which was when I first got there, which was just like, it was just a safe haven for weirdos, So that's why I felt great there. But then with all the tech stuff and all that boring stuff, it just really started to change. All my friends started to leave, and I was, it took me 2 years to get up the courage to move. But I'm so happy that I did, because it's amazing. It's like I was in a really bad place, really rough, like not crazy rough, but like uninspired, career potentially headed towards the toilet. I was just like no friends really, and I just had to just change my life.
That's wild. And I mean, did so like if the first sessions you did here, did like your manager hook them on and just say like, oh, you should go to LA, or did you have a friend down here who's like come down and write something, or how was that kind of transition? I know you said it was difficult, and especially transitioning from being in control of everything yourself, and then to the point you're talking about now, where it's almost like you can let anything happen and let it be what it is, without trying to like say, what does it mean? The second you're writing it,
Yeah.
But yeah, how was that? Like, when did you kind of realize like, oh, this works?
Well, that's the other thing, is my manager at the time ghosted me.
Oh, whoa.
While I was on tour, and he had his reasons, right? But
hang on, while you're on tour with the Hell Drummer?
No, different tour.
Okay.
Great tour,
right.
Actually. That yeah. That was when I was on tour with Betty Who.
Okay.
Who's like she's like a pop star, and just really fun. And it was so like she had backup dancers and stuff. And it was a blast. But I'm like writing him, like next steps. I'm putting out an EP in a couple of months, right? And it's just like didn't hear back until eventually I had to just cut ties. Wow. Months went by, and I just very out of character. He's just like a really good guy, really strange. So then I'm just like adrift. I've had this manager since the beginning of my career. Every decision I've ever made has like been run by him. And now I'm like, okay, I have to put out my EP by myself. Like I have no support. And then I'm just like, and that was such a disappointment, but then I guess I just had to like decide what to do. And I was talking to a lot of friends and being like, what should I do? And they all just kept telling me like, you gotta just come to LA, we'll hang out, we'll write a song. I'm like, write a song with you? Okay.
So it sounds like very kind of natural and organic in a way.
Yeah, it wasn't anybody saying, it wasn't any music industry overbearingness.
Right.
And most of those first songs, like, they never went anywhere, you know? It really was just me kind of like reaching out to my friends and saying, I'm thinking, I kind of want to break into this other side of the industry. Can I mooch off of like all the work that you've done to get yourself there? And just sort of like, you know, I'm like, I can sing, I can write, can I do it with you? You know, and they were nice enough too. And then some of the songs did hit. And I think that, and then that kind of like opened up some things, but it was all very slow. You know, it's not like anybody was like, oh yeah, we got to get this Geographer kid in here. It was all just personal relationships basically. And some chance, like I knew someone who had a session cancel while Big Data was in town, and so then I wrote with him and became friends with him. And then another person I write with all the time, Sydney Wazer, Clara Nova, another cancellation. But I was the guy that was like, if somebody cancels, I will drive 5 hours from San Francisco to LA to be there.
Wow.
And I think that helped. But then after that, doing that drive a lot and not having much of a life in San Francisco anymore, you know, no band, no manager, no friends. So it's like, what am I doing here? It's very expensive. You know, tacos are great, but they're good in LA too.
True.
Then I just did it, and it was terrifying.
Wow, that's rad. And I mean, and you're saying, you mentioned it, I mentioned it again, but now like your whole process with writing, you're just saying it's like you can really let songs be what they need to be. So do you find that like you just go into a session with someone and see what happens, or are you going in and saying, let's try to write something like this for that? Or, you know, if it's something for a placement, do you hear from a publisher they're looking for something specific? Or what's your general approach to writing sessions now?
Well, there's I would say there's two types. One is, and they're both of what you described. Like, one is where one of my friends who's signed to like a publishing company will come to me with a brief, which is just for people who don't know, which is just, you know, the music publisher will just give you a list of words basically that they want, and they'll tell you what it's for. Like, it's for a Target commercial. They want color, you know, just like fun, upbeat. And then the best part is they'll send you some reference tracks. And that's, I love that because I love getting into the DNA of songs too. And it's really fun to get into the DNA of a song, but then smush it around so you make its brother or its sister, and you're not making a clone, because that's the real challenge. Is because, like, you know, it's not that it's easy to copy a song, but it's definitely easier than making an original song that has the same elements. So then that happens a lot. But then conversely, you know, if I'm writing for an artist, like for their project, which is really, really fulfilling, I would say that's just as fulfilling as writing for me. You know, we'll get together, and whether I've met them for the first time or not, and then we'll just say, I'll talk to them a lot. Like, we just talk a lot. And then, you know, we start talking about our lives, and we get extremely personal really quickly. And then you're just like, there's our song. Let's write a song about that because I've been going through something similar. And then you write a song. Or, you know, sometimes it's like, I kind of want to write a piano ballad. And I'm like, great, got it. Let's do it. Or like, I want to write like a hard rock. And, you know, you just sort of like try to rise to the occasion. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But the great part is that, like, you know, when someone is doing a lot of sessions for their own record, as you know, they're really just throwing stuff at the wall. So it's like, that can be a blessing and a curse, because a lot of times you do all this work and nothing happens. You know, which is so sad. Yeah. It's really sad. But you're like, hey, what about that gorgeous song we wrote? And they're like, management didn't like it. And you're like, okay.
Don't you think it's difficult to explain to people who haven't done this, but I think one of the most amazing things about doing what we do, and in particular like that collaborative co-write thing, is it's like you have this license to cut through any kind of surface stuff with anyone, and to talk so deeply and intimately about like your most vulnerable thoughts and feelings and desires. And like, it's kind of remarkable how we can do that in music collaboratively.
Yeah.
And I think, for people who haven't done the co-write world, it's like, I think, when you're talking about, like, you're used to having control, it's me, it's my soul, or whatever, that whole thing where you need to be able to, like, merge souls or open the window of the soul. It's kind of crazy how deep you can go and how quickly, and then sometimes, like, never see the person again.
Ever again, and never before that.
Yeah, it's wild, isn't it?
Yeah, but maybe what you said, maybe that's why co-writes generate such great music is because you're opening each other's window to the soul, whereas you have to do that yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like maybe chatting with them for 2 hours ahead of time is the equivalent of going on a walk.
Yeah.
You just sort of like lull yourself into like and you get to, I don't know, it's just, that's the way people want to communicate at all times, right? They want to be like, hey, how are you? I'm Mike. This is the worst thing that happened to me in the last few months. What's the worst thing that happened to you?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Actually, Blackberry Jam Studios, who's up in BC, is just saying in a lot of way pre-production and song revision is his fave part of the process. And I gotta say, I agree with that. Like whole, like, when you take a song and it's like, what actually is this? And I think, that was almost our first question that you're talking about, which is like really trying to understand the DNA of a song. I do a lot of like kind of song doctoring stuff as like crossover from like co-writing into production. Like there's definitely something here, but what's actually it's like, what are you really trying to say, Mike? So you'll take it, they'll send you basically the almost finished or finished, but they're like, it's not quite right. And then or it's always like, there's like one song on the album where it's like everyone loves it, and you're like, I feel like there's more to it than this. You know what I mean? Like there's never a clear answer. Sometimes it can be like, we need to like get more melodic variation in the second half of the verse, you know what I mean? And other times you're like, when you say this, I just feel like there's way more going on. And you can go through a whole process. I've been through processes with like a couple of bands where it's like the singer like rewrites the lyrics like 3 times. There's one time on like the 3rd rewrite, I kind of sent everyone else out and went and sat down. I was like, what's this song about? And she like burst into tears and told me the whole story. It's like, oh my God, this is amazing. Then she rewrote it again, and it was like still that thing where it wasn't like fully like literal, but you suddenly like feel the thread of the story more, and it was just like, amazing record. But that's, I don't know.
That's awesome.
It's fascinating, that thing where we're just trying to like, because music ultimately is about going beyond words, isn't it? But it's like you need words as vessels, and it's like you want to communicate these things that are, there's no other medium really to do it. Which, I mean, if Parallel Universe Mike was a novelist, do you know what I mean? Like there's probably like a fork in timeline somewhere, and there's one of you that's sitting down at the typewriter.
That guy's miserable.
But was there like a real calling that pulled you away from novelisting into music?
Yeah, I mean, that was an example of me having like a long, hard talk with myself and saying, Mike, you want to be a novelist, but what you are meant to do is music. And I was just, because I'd always been the music dude, ever since I was a little kid. I was always, people in my town just associated me with music. It was like, first piano, then saxophone, then musicals, singing, and that was my entire identity. But I was also, I was very focused on academics, and so was my family, and there was never a question. I was like, it's weird, because I remember ever since I was little thinking I'm going to be a musician. Like I went to a James Taylor concert with my parents, and he's playing in an outdoor pavilion, and I'm like, yeah, I'll do that. That looks fun. And I'm like, little did I know the space between not doing that and playing pavilions, where I'm still there. It's like, but I guess I always had the confidence to think that, yes, I will do that for a living. And I had a lot of support around me, a lot of, both my parents were very supportive, and, school and everybody.
And were they supportive of you switching to music, or they're supportive of you as a novelist, or just supportive in general?
Just in general. I think they trusted that I would always land on my feet, and if I ever failed, I would get a real job. It's like, and then, I mean, my mom is so, my dad's no longer with us, but my mom is so psyched because she wanted to be a musician, like because she has a gorgeous voice, like Joni Mitchell kind of voice. And I think she feels like she could have been like a folk singer in the 70s, which would have been really cool. But so she's really happy to see me doing it. And wait, but what was the...
We were just talking about like how the going from being at college to be a novelist into
novels
like, because it's kind of
music.
like, the creativity and the words are all there, and like what does music communicate that words don't. I loved what you were saying earlier about like it's just more fun making records than writing. But
also there's one thing is like I don't like poetry, but I love lyrics.
Interesting point.
And I just don't connect with poetry. I think because it's too abstract for me without the music. Because if a song is poetry, which it's not, but if it is, then it's the combination of the sonic element and the verbal element. And those two make the one thing. But with poetry, it's just the words that make just as vivid of a picture as the sound and words. So, I mean, you could think like, yeah, we know. But to me, that makes all the difference, because if you take lyrics and just put them in a book, they're often very mundane, and a little childlike compared to like a Keats poem, But the best lyricists, like Paul Simon, are very heavily influenced by poetry, But I think if you were to set a poem to music, it would suck because there's too much information. There's like, the poem is doing everything. And then if you add the music in, you're like,
right.
This just got muddy. It just turned brown. So I think I don't know. I think I realized that I wanted to be a novelist more than I loved writing, more than I wanted to write.
Interesting. The process itself, like you were alluding to, it was like not as fun making it, but that's interesting.
Like, and it was fully ego-based, where I was just like, I'm at this college, I am an academic person, I wear corduroy jackets, blazers with the sleeve things. I am, in academia. But then when I left, I was like, that's not really what I'm like. Like I was kind of playing a part. Like obviously I love ideas, I love intellectual things, but I'm not an academia kind of guy. Like I don't have the patience for it, and I like being out in the world. I love getting dirty, So, and then I think I was just like, because I wrote 4 novels my senior year.
Oh damn! Wow.
And they were all bad. And
now tell us what you really think.
I was only supposed to write one. And so then I was like, I had this stack of bad novels and a stack of bad songs, because I was writing songs the whole time as well. But I had not written a good song yet. And I'd been writing since I was 12, But when I was 12, I didn't think there were good or bad songs. I just thought, you make a song and people love your song, right? It's like so then I took stock of the songs, and I was just like, these aren't good, but I think I have the tools to get really good at this if I work really hard and concentrate on it and put all my being into it. And then I looked at my novels and I was like, these are not good, and I don't think that I could, even if I work as hard as I possibly can, I think the best I'll ever become is a mediocre novelist. And maybe I was wrong, maybe I would be, a best-selling author now. But I think the life I've had is just so much richer, and it's the world, because music has always meant so much to me, and that's ultimately what drives me is, and it is abstract, it's not conscious, but the thing that drives me is if there's a world where I could create something that means as much to someone as those songs that I love meant to me, I mean, what better way to sort of justify your existence?
Absolutely. Matt's just saying, Matt Robertson, who's actually a previous guest on our last Beat Battle,
Oh, cool.
he's just saying he's trying really hard to listen, but he's really distracted by the OB8 and PS5. And is that an OBX or an 8?
It's an OBX.
It is an
yes,
OBX.
Well done.
All right. Sorry,
Yes.
I just got to go. Matt, come on. I spotted the synth model.
Gotcha,
Yeah.
Matt.
Shall we?
It's blue. It's not gray.
Shall we pivot into some like nerdy stuff?
Oh, I'd love to.
Okay, cool. I'd seen that you were mentioning about like a while back about your writing process when you started like getting more into using technology and stuff, and you might write something on the guitar, then start to wonder like, how is this going to work on a synth? Can you kind of like recap like just your journey with technology? Did you have like computers and nerdy stuff from the start, or were you like, I'm just going to like be playing in real time, or you're kind of like macho about your instruments to start with, or how did that unfold for you?
Yeah, so my dad was a huge nerd, like, and he was an early adopter of Apple products.
Oh my God, I'm just flashing back to that beautiful photo you posted. I'll see if I can bring that up while you're chatting. But yeah, please do keep telling us the stories.
So he was just like on board with Steve Jobs, and you know, because those early computers, they were not as good as the Microsoft ones. You know, like the even the Lisa, it was just, you know, it was like. But he just saw the potential in it, and I think he just loved Steve Jobs. And so he was all Apple. So there were always computers around the house. Like the first laptop ever was in the house. And like he could code and all this stuff. He kind of like got me into that, but that's not where my brain is. Like I cannot code, but he would do it with me and we'd make a computer game or something. Or I'd like make like a role-playing game on the computer where it's like, you know, I draw it in a thing called HyperCard Stack. If there's any real nerds, sign out. I'm looking at you. You know what that is. So I would like draw this thing in Mac Paint, and it'd be like, go through this door or this door. And then there'd be two different worlds. And it was really fun. So I did a lot of that. But he also had synthesizers around the house. And MIDI. He was huge into MIDI. Like, I guess MIDI was invented in 83?
Yeah,
is that
it
true?
goes way back. Yeah. And it was so that you could play two synthesizers at once. I hadn't even thought about sequencing, right? I was like, imagine how fat my sound can be if I have you know, the OB50 if we put 5 of them playing together or something.
Oh, man. It'd be amazing. And, he was just an early adopter of that. He loved Pat Metheny, so he had one of those MIDI or what are they called? Note to MIDI converters or something, pitch to MIDI converters on his guitar, and he would plug it into this cheesy like Roland sound emulator. He did not have great taste. Like he was playing it on like a Hammond organ sound or something, you know, and it's just like, yeah. And he would always play the same kind of licks. He's very good at the guitar, but so we would jam together. I'd play the saxophone, and we would often play like pop standards.
Oh, nice.
So I'd be playing like The Long and Winding Road. He's on MIDI guitar, and I'm on sax. It's like, so that was a huge part of my childhood. And one of the synths up there, the CZ1000, it's like the CZ101, pretty much exactly the same but harder to use. He had, and I've known that synth as long as I've had consciousness. So, but it turns out it's really cool, and I use it on almost everything.
Wow.
It's really hard to change the parameters, but you know, once you do. But so I kind of had this technology in my life, but I was playing very organic instruments. Like I was a saxophone guy for all of high school. I was like jazz saxophone player. And then even when I wasn't doing that, I was acoustic guitar boy. You know, I was like sad coffee shop boy with acoustic with an Ovation guitar with the like maple leaf holes.
Amazing.
Which wouldn't be caught dead with, now. It's just like, plug it into the pickup. I just want to sound like Dave Matthews. So I was playing like really organic music, and it wasn't until college where so when I went to college, my dad went on, I guess he got it on eBay, even though that was early days. He got me a DX100, which is, as I'm sure most people on this know, miniature DX7. Way easier to use, still next to impossible to use. But it has a bunch of
100 times easier to use than impossible is just like it's still impossible. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. 0 times 1,000 is 0. Yeah. And so I had, because he was like, well, you won't have a piano in your dorm room, but there was actually a grand piano in the lobby of my 3rd dorm, which was amazing. But so I had this tiny little keyboard, like fits on your lap. I thought it was a toy. I thought it was a piece of junk. I had no respect for it whatsoever. Like I was just like, and like now it's my prized possession. It rivals the Prophet in my heart as far as like my favorite synth, which is crazy, but because you can't top the Prophet. But so then I started learning about music. Because I did mention Dave Matthews, so I was listening in and at the risk of losing all your listenership, when I was in high school, and my disclaimer is I grew up in New Jersey. Hippies were the only people who were nice but still loved doing drugs. And so we just listened to Fish and Dave Matthews and like classic rock. And I was like, it doesn't get better than this. And then I went to college in Vermont and had a friend at the radio station. And he was like, Mike, I want to show you something. And so he brought me into the radio station and he was like, you can go into this room and you can burn any CD you want. You can just like rip it onto your computer. And so that's when I learned about the existence of Brian Eno, truly David Bowie, who obviously I had known. And like Prefuse 73, The Books, like, Broken Social Scene, Modest Mouse, and Interpol came out that year, and like my mind exploded. Like I was, a Badly Drawn Boy too. I don't know if you remember them. It's just like these like indie stalwarts, Iron and Wine, and Sufjan Stevens. I was just like awakened to indie music, really, and then also thoughtful mainstream music. It was just like, these people are making choices. They are not using the same guitar tone on every single song. You know what I mean?
Mind blown. Yeah.
Wait. The sound possibilities of even the guitar are endless.
Wow. Yeah.
And so then I like looked at this keyboard differently.
Right.
I was like, wait a second. Okay, Brian Eno says his favorite synth is the DX7. I have a DX100. Let's check this thing out. And then I started making like, Postal Service came out too. And then I was like, that's my way in. Because I have this like pretty choir boy voice, which I don't hear in the music that I listen to. So I was like, in high school, I wanted to be Kurt Cobain or Liam Gallagher, but that's not happening. I'll destroy my vocal cords. But when I heard all these weirdos making music, I was like, oh my God, it's cool to just be yourself. Like they've been telling me all along, guidance counselors. And I'm just like, But it's like, it is cool if you are weird like yourself, like Magnetic Fields. And so then I was like, all right, I got this synth. I love electronic music now. And I'm gonna just like play the synth and sing pretty. And the songs I came up with were very like, they were very boxy, like it was just like I'm playing the bass and then the melody and I'm maybe singing that same melody. But because of the sounds I was using, it was really cool. And it was kind of like I was taking like finger picking, my style of finger picking, which is very influenced by like Piedmont blues, where you like thumb the bass note and then you kind of go like, and you're just like, the bass just keeps trucking. and I kind of applied that to the synth, and then I got really excited, and then basically made like emo music and started that band. And then after that, it was just sort of like synths I just got really obsessed with them.
Interesting. Okay, so it's quite kind of pivotal to you becoming like an artist, as opposed to like something like in 2016 you downloaded Serum or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Still haven't downloaded Serum.
Okay, nice. And how's like that journey gone to, like, you know, you've posted some beautiful pictures of you surrounded by nice gear and stuff like that. I actually, like, genuinely, from looking at your Instagram, I thought like you lived up in the mountains or something like that somewhere, because you've got like nice leaves outside your studio. And it kind of seems to like suit the sound of your music. So I was surprised to find you're like actually right in the city. But
yeah, well, I mean, I am technically in the mountains.
Okay. Right?
But, you know, about 5 to 10 minutes away from the horrifying disgustingness of, like, you know, the city. Yeah. But I feel really removed from the city where I am. But so it's like, it is a canyon, which is just so inspiring and glorious, except when I do make music, I'm in this windowless room.
Right.
But then when I do my live streams, I take my synths upstairs, and there's this like sort of like a beautiful vista, which is sometimes blown out on the camera. But yeah, it's I think I started getting into buying analog synths like once I got going.
Right.
You know, it was like, because the gear acquisition aspect of things is pretty intense when you first start out. And when I was starting out, it was like, I don't know if you'd call it chiptune, but like it was those kinds of synths. Those were the cool synths. It was like, so I just found actually that thing up there. I just found that in a thrift store for $7, and then that became like the sound of so many of my first popular songs. And so I'm like, okay, I don't need the whole idea was you don't need expensive gear. You don't need to be even good at your instrument. You know, you don't need to go into a studio. That was kind of like the whole indie thing. But then once I did start going into studios and they did have synths, I was just like, wow, I need to start possessing those things. And then they kind of fell into my lap. You know, it'd be like, oh, my friend is selling or we'll let you borrow this Prophet 5. And you're like, what? And then you do it. And then they're like, they're moving. Do you want to buy it? And you're like, yes.
Right.
And you just take the plunge and you're just like, okay, go for it.
And did having those in the studio like change how you write? Did it inform you or like generate a different resonance for you creatively?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think so what was I doing before? I like had my toy synths, and then I had soft synths, like, but I didn't really know how to use them too much, because I wasn't like super empowered, I think, on the computer at that point. So I like, you know, I was using FM8 and just kind of like tripping and stumbling around in there, and and then
tripping physically or psychedelically?
No, physically. Okay. Just like, sort of like,
you're like, just gonna drop a tab of acid and mess around on FM8. And it's
that sounds fun. But I actually, probably my most iconic bass sound, which is from my song Kites, is a GarageBand synth.
Amazing.
That I just tweaked the knobs on it. And then obviously brought it to the studio, sent it through some nice equipment, right, to beef it up. But the sound, so to me, it was really like, you don't need expensive stuff. You just need a good ear to move it around. But then when I did get sort of like the state-of-the-art gear, it really opened up a totally different way of writing, where it was just like, okay, I can make like album-ready sounds before I go to the studio. Because usually I'd mock up these elaborate demos and then just recreate them sort of like paint by numbers in the studio, which was not very fun, you know, because it was just like, I have the sound, it's just recorded poorly. So now I have to do it. But now I'm like, I can record my demos properly and well, and then when I get into the studio, fly those tracks in and then have fun.
Right. So you're
and then like
building
with the tools that I don't have. You know, like all these awesome Ampeg amps and like weird 50s amps with reverb in them. You know, it's like, or a grand piano. And then I think as technology has progressed, soft synth wise, and like acoustic emulator instruments, you know, it just opens up the possibilities where I had an album or an EP 2 years ago that was all piano, which I never would have done if I didn't have, you know, I eventually went into a studio and recorded it on a piano, but writing the demos with the soft synths, like Contact pianos, I just like, I never would have written those songs. And it would be a totally different song if I wrote it on synth. Yeah. So it's like, the tools for me very much inform the way I write. Like that's pretty much what it's about.
And when you're writing the musical side, do you tend to, is it like you just come into the studio and say, I'm going to make something and then see what falls onto your fingers? Or do you walk in and you have like the melody is in your brain and then you're flashing? Do you know what I mean? How do you interact like your brain and technology?
Well, I almost never go in with an idea. I think I just like come into this room and I just start playing, you know, like messing around, like playing like a child in a sandbox. Like I'm just like, that's fun. And then once I hit something that I really, you know, you get that spark and that like jolt of adrenaline, and then you're like, woo, record that. And then you're like, here we go, Mike, it's happening again, you know, and you're just like, don't fall off. And then it's kind of like, yeah. And then I just start building from there. But you know, every now and then a melody will pop into my head and I'll record it into my phone, and then I'll go back and then work on that. That's pretty rewarding too.
Did you go through a phase like early on, like when you would try to visualize songs in my head? Like I remember filling up notebooks when I was like in my early 20s in London, when I was out of the studio going, and the beat will do this. I was like trying to do all like these kind of like systems of notation, and like could never ever translate them into anything meaningful.
Yes, absolutely. Because I'd be in class or something, and I'd hear a melody, and back then I thought ideas were really like precious. You know, like this might be the only good idea you ever have. And so I was like, okay, I have to figure out how to write this melody down, but I don't have perfect pitch. So there was like a series of like dots and dashes that I would use to be like up one from here, down two. And I don't think I ever recovered one of those songs.
Yeah, it's wild, isn't it? I think I like now it's just much more like, oh, there's a cool song playing on like Universe FM or something like that, and it's like you just kind of enjoy it. But
Universe FM. That's great.
Or when you know come into the studio going like it goes like this, and the first sound you bring up isn't that, and it like goes and like eradicates your brain. So,
exactly. Yeah, the translating from Universe FM to real world is really tough.
To K-Rock,
right? It's like to K-Rock. Because you could hear a symphony in your head. Like sometimes I hear really complicated arrangements in my head, and I'm like, what am I supposed to do now? You know, you just like, I try to find the bass note, like I try to find the root note of the chords, and then I'm like, well, I don't know. And I just gave up on it because it's just so frustrating where you're just like, shit, am I like the next, you know, classical composer of our generation, but I just don't know, how to write it, you know?
It's wild, isn't it? Yeah,
it's very seldom that I sit and think. Do you ever sit and just like visualize a song in its entirety?
If one randomly pops into my head, then kind of, but not in terms of figuring it out. The one thing I used to do back in the tape days, before Logic hit version 2.5, was like if I was like recording stuff on 4-track when I was an audio engineering student, and you could get 2 hours in the 24-track studio, then it's like, you know, you'd have all like your riffs and your ideas that you're kind of playing around with, so you'd know what they were. Then I'd draw out a big grid with like bar numbers and then listen to the song in my head, and that's how I'd get the arrangement. But it's like I knew what the parts were, if you know what I mean. So here's the riff, okay, yeah, the drums will come in there, and then it's like, well, we need a bass line, I don't know what that is, but it's like, so you kind of, so you'd hear it through in a flow, And then on like track 23, I'd record bar numbers, so just like 1, 2, and then
cool.
Yeah, so but that isn't really necessary now, you know.
Sure.
Yeah.
But a lot of the unnecessary rigmarole, it really makes some special products, I think.
Yeah, totally.
Like the clunkiness, like the Mad Max car.
Yeah.
You know?
Totally. But I think what you're saying, just that it's almost that way of just setting yourself up to feel frustrated the whole time. And then then it's also like, I think once you develop that feeling of like trust in the creative process, like this will pop up if it needs to. It'll just turn up. You know?
Agreed.
Yeah.
And once you're like, hey, if you can't remember that melody, maybe it's not that great. You know, where you're just like, maybe you should just think of another one that's more memorable.
Totally. Oh, goodness. Yeah. I mean, it's funny, actually, when I was working with Björk, there's like a couple of times where she'd come into the studio in the morning and go sit and say, I dreamt a song. And she'd literally just like play it and then sing it. And, you know, so it's kind of interesting. So I think it works for some people. The first producer I worked with full-time in London had perfect pitch. And I just thought all producers were like that. And he'd
something you can learn.
Yeah, and he could like write out, like he'd hear like a whole big crazy free jazz kind of trumpet solo, and he'd write it out by hand and then do a paper edit on a score, and then like we'd stick it together in Pro Tools, and it just seemed perfectly natural at the time. Then you figure out like, oh, that's not really how it works.
Like, oh, right, it's just like typing. That's amazing. Oh my god.
Kind of wild.
As opposed to, I feel like I have like tortured songs out of myself and string parts, like just like, you're coming with me, you know, it's just like pulled it out with so much energy, where at the end you're just like, I don't know, maybe I should just play folk music. You know, you're just like
and you were saying, Mike, like you're very fluid now with like collaborating with people and bringing in fresh energy. So it's and like you said, like your process of creation is actually very like enjoyable. So is it safe to say that you're not trying to force anything? It's like you really let your own intuition go where it is, and then like invite in the other energy as and when it's needed.
Yeah, because I think I did get to the place where I had a stranglehold on the creativity, where because one of my friends, James Riotto, he's an engineer at Tiny Telephone, and then also, you know, producer in his own right, and I think he's building a studio in his house. But anyways, Bay Area guy, but he would engineer for me in those early sessions. And once at lunch, he's like a very forthright guy. He was like, hey, are you having any fun? And I was like, and I was like, fun? No, music is not fun. I'm trying to make something great. And he was just like, I don't know, I've seen a lot of people have a lot of fun, and they made great music too. And I was just like, whatever, man. But then like that kind of like stuck with me. And then that album did not turn out the way I wanted it to. And I was like, maybe the missing element was joy, you know? Because I think that's the one thing you can really hear in music is like, and by joy, I don't mean like laughing and dancing around. I mean like an exaltation of the spirit, you know? That it's like, it's not a means to an end. It is the end itself. Like the creation is what's fun. Because he was like, dude, you're in this place with all this amazing gear and like cool people, and like you should enjoy yourself. But I was just like a nervous wreck. I would rent a studio for 10 days and it'd be like album or bust, you know? And it's just, I didn't want to take any breaks. Just when the band would go on a break, I'd work on guitar tones for like the next 3 songs, have them lined up. You know, it was just, I couldn't sleep. My own songs would be playing in my head, and I just like couldn't go to sleep. And I would just go nuts, kind of. And I'm like, I think I thought that was cool, you know?
Yeah.
You know, it was like Radiohead Ben's era, where it's like, you gotta go nuts to get the goods. I don't know. I hope you don't, because I like not being nuts.
Well, there's definitely like, there's almost like that kind of like macho, like, I worked for 18 hours. I have not slept in a week.
Yeah.
Therefore, it must be great, you know?
Right. That's the only way you can square it in your mind, that you're just like, I've made something great.
Yeah. It's funny. I have told this story a few times, but I'll just mention it briefly. Like, I remember when I was still in the UK, like, listening to hip hop records, and like, you know, Tim Bland's first solo album, and he had this song, he's just like, make a beat in 10 minutes. And I always assumed it was a metaphor. and then I got to sit in on one of his sessions, and everyone's literally in this like super bling studio all day and all night. And then he rocks in at like 2 a.m. and chats with Jimmy Douglas for a little bit, then puts on headphones and goes like that for 10 minutes, then nods at Jimmy, and Jimmy puts this thing up on the speakers, and you're like, oh my god, it's a Timbaland beat. Then he like walked into the booth and went 4 times in a row down the song. He went, yeah, 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 yeah. And then 5th time down, he did a rap and he left, and he was maybe there like 25 minutes, and I was like, what the hell? And I'd been doing like...
I could never allow myself to live that way. Even if I did finish it, I would never be able to be like, all right, free time.
Yeah.
I did a good job, and now it's like, I gotta see the calluses to feel like I can stop.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Yeah, it's like you just need to feel like you've really invested something. But I guess, in all like seriousness, by this point you have invested like years of your life agonizing over how to get those tones. Right. So one would hope by now you're pretty good at it, right?
Right. Yes.
And it's that
I can call them up at will.
Yeah. And I keep trying to figure out, like, I try to like be very helpful on this stream and answer people's questions, and sometimes I'm like, gear doesn't matter, and it's like I'm sitting here surrounded by all this gear or whatever.
Look at.
But yeah, what do you think about this concept? Like, do you have to go through a process in your growth as like a contemporary recording artist using technology and operating relatively independently, where you do need to basically get pretty immersed in the whole technical thing and like get really absorbed and kind of go down all the rabbit holes, possibly to the detriment of the higher creative purpose? But is it like just a necessary lesson to learn?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Because I think as long as you're using a tool creatively, that's more important than using it proficiently. I think always. Like but I do think it's important to be able to do that with everything. Like if you have a thumb piano, you should be able to make a cool song out of it. And if you have a Prophet, make a cool song out of that. But I think a lot of creativity can be lost in proficiency. For instance, that first cellist in my band, he was straight up a genius, but it would never come out because he was just locked in process. Like he would spend hours building FM synthesizers from scratch on his computer, and he would send me this hour-long waveform of the coolest sounds. And then I'm just like, great. Like, can you put those on a record or something? And it never would. It was just like, I'm still learning. It's like, you don't really need to know how to engineer to make a cool vocal sound. You just need passable gear, right? You need like gear that people will accept. But then sometimes when you use gear weird, that's cool stuff. Like I look at a guy like Gus Dapperton. Are you familiar with him?
Not familiar with Gus.
He's sort of like a new, like hot scenester dude. And you can tell he's not a great engineer, but he makes bizarre and fun choices, and it's like his voice sounds weird, his guitar sounds strange, and his arrangements are empty, but it's really exciting, and I think that's, but I am coming from an indie ethos, I think if you're trying to make pop music, you better record a good vocal, like you better, you can't have any noise in that vocal. But yeah, I think you should only use the gear, or like only expand your gear once you've sort of feel like you've mastered, or you're no longer inspired by a piece of gear. Like I have a question for you, which is what do you do? How do you maintain? Because I think that when you're in a state of discovery, when you don't really know how to use your gear, that's when you're at your best. So how do you then, once you have mastered pretty much all the gear, how do you then cultivate that state of discovery?
My friend, that is an excellent question, and it was a major crossroads I found myself at a while back. And that's part of why I put all of this in. which is just basically like
Yes.
part of why we got into making music with technology is that feeling of exploration, and you're tweaking stuff and then something happens, you're like, whoa, that's crazy, you know? And definitely like, you know, I do like a ton of mixing and everything. And with that, it's like you want pure control. You want to control the speakers without it thinking about what's happening technically. So you just go, boom, 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 boom. We need to do this, this, this. And you're not thinking about what frequencies. You're not thinking about. You're just doing them, and it all flows. But you know, because you know exactly the results. So that's a bit more like you're a pianist who can improvise because you know all the scales. But then you want to be surprised, right? And you want to have. I mean, that feeling of exploration is really precious, and you know, especially some of the earlier records I worked on in my career, the feeling of like no one in the world has ever done this before was very strong. And so that helped. I don't actually use a modular that much, but it was definitely to try and address that. And then actually I went through a massive process a number of years ago of reworking fundamentally how I worked and especially how I programmed beats, and basically I was looking to bring that element of surprise and interactivity into, basically I wanted to set things up so that my computer could surprise me, even if it was like entirely controllable. So that became like a lot of stuff around like library organization and building sampler instruments. So I have all these systems of like, I have like groups of 128 drums that are on like a single pad on Ableton, and you can just like go boom, 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 and like, oh, that sounds weird. Okay, let's run with that. And, you know, and then almost deliberately working a little bit more sloppy at certain points in time. And that, so there's been a lot of ways of doing it, but I think part of it is actually just not trying to control the situation so hard. Do you know what I mean? It's like one of Quincy Jones's most famous quotes, and, you know, like, I think he says you need to leave enough room to you need to leave enough room for God to enter the room. Leave enough space for God to enter the room, which we can interpret as the soup. You need to leave room in the bowl for the soup to fill up.
Yes, I have that quote on my desk.
And so that's like,
I'm just like, it's true.
And it is just not trying to grip so hard or have any preconceptions. So do you know what I mean? It's like
leave room.
I mean, there's tracks I've done where like I had one thing in solo on a fade out, and then that turned into like a middle eight because it did this weird jump when the loop came back around. You know, like just weird random stuff like that, I think. And then otherwise, I'm sure you get this when you're collaborating with people. But that's part of why you work with collaborators, right? Because nothing is more unpredictable than another human being.
Than a human being. They shock you. Because we want to capture lightning in a bottle. Right? And that's like with electronics, that can be hard to do. But when you don't know what you're doing, and then suddenly your synth sends back something crazy, and you're just like, all right, how do I recreate this and then sort of use it in a way that makes sense? That's the real challenge, is because you know, you almost want to walk that line between being able to control the machine and then also not, because the machine will do what you tell it to do, you know, and that's not fun for anybody, really.
Totally. And actually, there was a guy called Mark Bell who had a project called LFO, who's like he's a big collaborator with Björk and a pioneer of British techno and Warp Records and everything. But he was a person who introduced me to, I think at the time it was like Reactor modules and stuff like that, and crazy sequencers that would just kind of spit out noise. And just like you're just recording a ton of stuff, and then you just grab the bit
and then you chop it up.
So it's and you know that it was really like that concept of musical systems, and you don't need to know exactly what the hell it's doing. And until that point, everything had been 100% intention. Do you know what I mean? And like I kind of broke through as I was like one of the first wave of Pro Tools people who was using it to control the fabric of space and time in a way that no one's been able to do before or since. But that was like, I can control every single oscillation of every waveform, and you know, like down to like the tiniest fraction of a second. And so, but yeah, so there's that like relinquishing that everything is there because I put it there, into just like all this shit happened and I don't know, but some of it was cool, and then. You know.
You don't want to be God. You want to be just like, I don't know, Moses parting the waters. You know, it's like, it's because life is ordered chaos. Nature is ordered chaos. And that's why we like looking at nature more than we like looking at a garden, which is ordered order. You know, it's like chaos, because when you're talking about that reactor thing spitting out sound, that's the chaos, and then you chopping it up and putting it, where you want it, that's order, and that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I don't really understand, like, what generates the sound in Reactor. I've never used it.
Reactor is kind of like a digital modular, so you can kind of build anything in there. So there's all these crazy things where they're like sequencers with synths built in, and you don't have any idea what any of the knobs or anything do. So you just go in and go, "Wah!" and like shit comes out. Then others are like, it's an emulation of a 303. And actually, Bergbeats, our friend Adam in the chat's just saying, he always leans into the weird random shit that happens in his recordings, and dropping strange samples into the session triggers that for him often. Yeah. And actually, I have to say, like, sampling, and I know you were mentioning like sampling kind of changing your approach quite a lot, but for me, that whole thing where you bring in a stack of records, like I was a silent member of this group called Uncle in the UK, and James Avell, the kind of main dude, would just like literally bring in boxes of records. And you're just going through like looking for a thing that does a thing, and then that weird juxtaposition of two elements that aren't in key and how to pull them apart. So it's almost like that kind of just looking for something that isn't in the box. And this, anytime we have a sample drop as well, I don't know if you saw this at the start of the stream, people are asking what key it's in. I'm like, don't know what key it's in. That's that's just kind of mild sample.
What are you trying to?
What, he's trying to make something musical?
That's not what we're doing here.
Yeah, but that's also covering my own insecurities around the fact I can't play instruments, so that's all.
Yeah,
good.
I don't know what.
Yeah, cardio party eye roll. Absolutely. Okay, and then Zach, CIV Music in the session saying, my way of getting randomization is saving all my MIDI in a session and then send it to my synths and randomly move things or flip through presets I don't normally use and such.
Fun.
Yeah.
Yes, some of my best drum beats I've written by dropping the MIDI in like offset by accident,
right.
and then I'm like, whoa, that's a cool groove, and then maybe I'll have to move a thing or two, but it's like, it's really hard to facilitate those on purpose, those kinds of mistakes.
Well,
right?
I think when I was working with a Prodigy, actually, Liam Howlett taught me about not editing cleanly on downbeats. Or like I would always be trying to put like nice little fade outs on stuff and be like, what the fuck are you doing, man? And you just go, no, just chop it off, man. Just bosh, chop it in, chop it out. And so it's like, the way, this is like a very simple hack, but just zoom out where you can't actually drop it in the right place. You know what I mean? So I do that sometimes. I'm just like zooming out where you don't have the resolution and.
So it's not clean.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you have the attack of like the sample.
Yeah, the little space like kicking in before the drum, or like it's not quite linking up to the downbeat, and you get like things get a little bit wonky or something.
Do you ever do the? Oh, sorry.
No, after you.
Do you ever do the Jay Dilla? Try to get Jay Dilla's feel.
Oh my God.
In where.
I personally don't, because I don't have it, and I never seem to have like the latency figured out of my things, if you know what I mean.
Right.
And like in a way, my DNA is like these things are ridiculously tight. Then you move other things around. The closest I get is actually like programming percussion and stuff. Like sometimes you're warping it, and then sometimes you're turning warp off. This is in live, and then pitching it up and down, so it does like the record player kind of speed up, slow down. Then you'll have things that kind of don't fall as cleanly, if you know what I mean. But Dilla is a genius, and people who could just like go, it goes there. Yeah. It's Yeah, I never.
Yeah, like if you can be virtuosic at an MPC, he probably is. Yeah.
So Berg's just saying it's an awesome conversation. Oliver, you love throwing reverb on something and then notching up a frequency that's in key, and the resonance often creates a rhythm you never think of on your own. That's an interesting one. Love that.
That is interesting.
Very nice.
Oh, like like putting distortion on a 808 tom or something. Like that'll give it like
pulling out the note kind of thing, or I guess it's a flip, isn't it? If you're distorting as well, pulling out all the weird harmonics and everything.
Yep.
Yeah. Mike, while we're waiting for everyone to see if we get any good questions in here, how does it feel having Hollow out?
Oh, it feels really good. Like that, because that's the focus track from the album too. So it's kind of been like, music video, and then there's a big push, and it's just great to see it in the world. And I also think it's one of the simpler concepts I've ever had for a song. Like, usually I'm like, why do people live in boxes? Why do we constrain ourselves? Do we prefer cages? But this one is like, why do we say such shitty things to the people we love? Because it's just, why why do we fight with our partners? What the heck is the point of that? We both love each other. What are we doing? So I mean, Hollow just really simply just says, I didn't mean that.
Right.
Did you mean that?
Yeah.
And it's just really fun to sing too, because it's just, I mean, we'll never answer that question. I don't know if I've never figured it out, to get to a point of like true peace where you're just like, this is what I mean, because we're always trying to figure out what we mean. And I don't know why it's so hard to, like, why are we designed that way? Where it's like our meaning exists below the surface and we got to dig to it. It's like, okay. But so it's really fun to be performing it, for live streams and stuff, and just be able to listen to it, I love doing that when a song comes out, put it on, it comes out at like 9 p.m. usually on the West Coast, and then put it out and you're like, it exists, and it's no different than you listening to it on your phone or like in Dropbox, but for some reason it always feels great.
Yeah, that's wild. And with all this new stuff, like, it does feel like there's an additional level of kind of like clarity, or kind of I hate saying stuff like punchiness or whatever, but like,
sure,
there's a real kind of confidence to the sound, or it just feels like an evolution of your sound while still being unmistakably you. But was there anything that happened in the process of making like this new batch of songs, or Hollow in particular, that was different?
Yeah, well, I'm really happy to hear you say that, because that was, it's like, I really did I wanted to up the ante on the, I guess mostly on the drum sounds, where it's like, I did want the drums to have a lot of punch and oomph, but I didn't want them to be like indie sounding drums. I didn't want them to be like pop sounding drums, but I wanted them to have a lot of impact. So I don't know if this is sacrilege in your world, but I used a lot of splice samples.
Not sacrilege at all, man.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
There's some good shit on there.
That's what I'm saying. But every time I talk to people about it, they're just like, "Oh, okay."
Oh my god.
What? It's like, if you can't find a good kick sound on splice, then you don't know what a good kick sound is. It's like, so when I would get lost in a track, that was my collaborator.
Right.
I would then, not just drums, right, but like loops. So then I would be like, okay, I don't even know what drum beat I would write to this song. Then I would just find my favorite beats on Splice, download like 30 of them, drop them all in, and then one at a time check them out, and more often than not, layer them. So it's like a lot of weird polyrhythms happening, different genres, and then I got what I think are some very atypical, for me at least, beats in there, and unintentional, which I think is the most important thing. But the sound, if I ever needed like more fidelity on the kick or the snare, you just look up punchy,
right? Yeah,
and there it is.
Yeah, the Brits say does what it says on the tin.
Nice. Yeah, so I think that really freed me up in a cool way. And then also melodic samples too, taking those, because it's kind of like, I'm not good at sampling. I've tried to sample from records. It's too intense for me, almost emotionally. Like, I'm just like, I get the sample and I'm like, ooh, this feels so good, but I can't order it. I can't bring it into the control space, where it's just like, now I want to change chords, but I'm stuck. And it's like, okay, well, we've got a good verse because we don't need to change chords, but now I need a bridge. Yeah. What am I supposed to do? But that's where a guy like you would come in. It's like, hey, you did a good verse, man. Good for you.
Yeah.
I'll handle the bridge. But with the samples on Splice, it's like, you just type in the key that you're in, and then, or not, and then you pitch it down yourself. But you can type in major or minor, and like you can find really interesting atmospherics too, which is like, that's one thing too, is like, I've got my noise filter, I've got my weird cello, I've got my guitar, my pedals. I want something new. And it's like, okay, I'll go find this, what I don't even know what it is. It's like, sounds like maybe people talking into like a deviant reverb or something. It's just like, and you layer that with a bunch of other weird stuff, write it, and like put your own verb on it. That's a lot. There's a lot of that on the record, and a lot on Hollow.
Right. Awesome. Nice. So, and I guess like when you're doing that, you probably just like, I'm obsessed with like layering textures. Do you know what I mean? Like juxtaposing textures. So it's like if you're always drawing from the same things, it's just, it's nice. The one thing that sounds like it's a 90s reverb, and the other thing that sounds all like beautiful and vintage, and then the other thing that's plasticky as hell, and then you get this nice depth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, 'cause particularly with ramp ups.
Right.
Like I've got the. It's like, okay, great. We've heard that a billion times. What can we do that's different? And then you find you just layer them all, and then like,
what can we do? Use all of them. Yeah, totally. We have a question for you, Mike, from Sevi Music, who's our friend Zach up in Calgary. His question starts, question, to what extent is it acceptable that all your tracks start to sound similar? Is there a line between having a sonic footprint and repeating yourself?
That is a very good question. That's something I've sort of like bit my nails about a lot. I would say I'll use some examples there. So like Tom Petty, for the majority of his career, every song could have been from the same album, right? Basically, up until like 82. And really then only just that one Don't Come Around Here No More is the only standout, and that whole rest of the album is just rock and roll. So I think if you can write hooks as good as Tom Petty, your songs can sound the same. Like if you can write a song that feels, because it's just important that the song feels unique in and of itself. It doesn't matter that it sounds unique. It just needs to be, oh, I'm listening to American Girl versus I'm listening to Refugee. You know the difference, even though it's kind of feels like the same song. But I think I would say don't ever worry about stepping away from what you think people conceive of as your sound, because it's you. You can't help but make your music. And if you look at some of the greatest pioneers of sound of all time, like the Beatles or Radiohead or even Pink Floyd, which they do sound pretty similar, but also really different if you hone in on the tones. They're not concerned. In fact, they're very concerned with not sounding like themselves. And U2 did that too with Joshua Tree. That's why they brought in Eno and Daniel Lanois. Yeah, because they were like, and I love the luxury of this, where they're like, everything that sounded like U2, we wanted to sound different. And you're just like, wow, cool. Like ballsy. Like it's just like, because you were doing pretty well. But that's courageous. I think people love hearing that. Explore, and you made it. There's no way it'll sound like anything but you.
I think there's also that thing where I kind of have this joke a few times with artists when I'm working with them. Have you ever heard like there's a kind of a parable of the Baha'i faith? The Baha'i faith is like all religions are one religion. Do you know what I mean? Because we're all trying to drink the same soup, right? And they tell the story about there are 3 or 4 blind people, and they each get to touch an elephant, and one of them touches its trunk, they say like, oh, it's a big, long, thick thing with like wrinkles on it. Then another one touches the leg, and it's like, it's like a tree trunk, and another one touches its body, and it's like a wall. And that's a little bit like when you're making your own music, from your position, like the sound that's here, the sound that's there are completely different directions. But for the audience perceiving you, sorry, this is kind of actually the opposite question. This is almost like, how do you make sure that you feel like there's a unified thing as opposed to sounding the same?
Right.
But it's like you have to understand that your position being in the middle of your own music is going to be entirely different from anyone else perceiving it from the outside.
So true.
But I think what you're saying in a way, Mike, about like just the feeling of the song is the most important thing. I really like that. I think that's a much simpler story than the Baha'i one.
No, I like that a lot. Because you are the elephant.
You are the elephant. That's right. Yeah, exactly.